Welcome to the Business and Beards podcast, spotlighting Miami County businesses. You bring your business and we'll provide the beards. Hello and welcome back to the Business and Beards podcast. I'm joined with my co-host as always, Buddy, and I'm Parker. And today we've got Senator Doug Shane. Thank you for joining us, Doug.
Very happy to be here.
Yeah, welcome. So if you don't mind, Doug, I mean, your time is, especially here, is valuable to a lot of people, especially Kansas citizens. I want to hear about how you got before the senator time. Would you start about, because you are a small business owner in the area, would you start there and then we work our way to the Senate?
Sure, yeah, we can start there. So we're obviously sitting here in Lewisburg, Kansas, my hometown. I graduated from Lewisburg High School, and my professional journey has been in the animal health industry. So I went to Kansas State, got a bachelor's degree in animal science and industry, got a veterinary degree and a PhD as well in production medicine and epidemiology, and worked in corporate animal health for a number of years. And for the last few years, now I am a part-time professor at Kansas State University at the Olathe campus, so I do some graduate level instruction there. But then I have my own consulting business and help support some different animal health companies as they try to navigate the United States market here. And we also have some of our own products in those companies that I'm affiliated with.
Very cool.
I just want to reiterate, very busy. Thank you for your time. This is amazing, and especially hearing all that. I mean, you got a lot going on. I feel like sometimes I look at my day and I'm like, how do I even get through the day? And then somebody like you comes along and I need to quit complaining. So that's awesome.
So, I mean, what is your area that you're advising for these individuals with animal health?
Yeah, so it's everything from technical marketing to sales support to research and development strategy and regulatory strategy to just overall business strategy. So we're kind of touching on all kinds of different areas. I have a couple of business partners that I work with in a company called Cornerstone. And we kind of wear all kinds of different hats for our clients, so kind of whatever they need. I've had the opportunity to work both in the R&D area of corporate animal health companies as well as in the business development side and the technical marketing side.
How is that transition from working with large entities to small, local, hometown companies, Wildcat Vet, Lewisburg Animal Clinic, companies like that? Are you dealing with vets specifically, or is it mostly large organizations?
So I'm interfacing with private veterinarians to help promote our products, help set up small trials, product experiences, but also lean on them for market insight and market research and bring them ideas and see what they think. So I am interacting with some of our local veterinary practitioners and some of our local businesses. As a matter of fact, I'll be scrubbing in and participating in a surgery tomorrow for a new product out of Israel that we're helping to support. So we're doing lots of exciting things for the animal health industry. But I grew up in a small business family. So my parents owned a manufacturing company up at 75th and I-35 up in Overland Park called Mid-American Fittings. So I grew up in domestic metals manufacturing. That's how I grew up in the small business. So I always believed my life in the corporate environment would be finite because I could only tolerate that environment for so long. Because it's a very different environment from the small business environment where you're accountable for the decisions you're going to make. You're responsive to the needs of your employees. They're in your care, and the business at the end of the day is for providing greater service to your customers and also, of course, to make yourself a good living. So just a different mindset. I like to say that we have the velvet handcuffs or the golden handcuffs of corporate industry, that you get a good salary, you get great benefits, but you're not your own person either.
So it's where to go and what to do and when to take a break and when I can eat, and I get that a lot.
So it's great for some people, and it's fantastic that we have the businesses that help provide those employment opportunities to people. But independent folks like myself, we want to, got to get out from that grind, so to speak.
Definitely. And the community connection is always key with everything that you've talked about so far, definitely ingrained with being a Lewisburg and Miami County resident. So you've definitely been working as a local as much as possible, but what made you start to look outside at the state of Kansas that led you on this journey through the wonderful political process that you went through and then even to today?
Yeah, so my parents did a great job raising us to be service-minded and engaging both in politics but also in charity. So I was raised with that service mindset and raised to care about what's happening in the world around me, not to just care about what's happening in my household. So that spirit came with me. At K-State, I was the president of the College Republicans. I was a student senator in the Student Government Association. I was president of the Graduate Student Association. So even in college, I was still engaged in doing things. After veterinary school and graduate school, I took a step back from all that stuff because I've worked so hard to, hit my career path, and we started, my wife Caitlin and I, we were starting to have kids, so kind of stepped away from that political world for a little while. And then I got a phone call when there was a vacancy on the school board here in Lewisburg, and was asked if I'd be interested in trying to fill that vacancy. And so I thought about it and decided that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go ahead and serve my community on the Board of Education and put in my application to fill that vacancy. Of course, that was during the COVID era. So there was a lot of interesting and important conversations happening at that time. And through that experience, I got re-engaged with the political process. Of course, that was the local political process, and there's no politics more challenging than local politics because it's your neighbors, right? And but that got me re-engaged and also got me really passionate about education policy, both at the district level but also statewide. And took on, became the chair of the Miami County Republican Party, became treasurer for the 3rd Congressional District Republican Party, and then the opportunity to run for Senate presented itself, and we decided, my wife and I, decided that it was a journey that we should take, and here we are.
I love how you say me, right? Because it's as much a her journey as it is yours, because all the time you're out and about and being the face of the community, there's still that home life you don't forget about, and I give my wife full credit for what we've accomplished as well, because without her filling in the cracks and taking care of the kids and doing all the things, it just doesn't happen. So I'm glad to hear that you put a lot of that emphasis on family. That's awesome.
Yeah, we have 4 kids that are 2, 4, 6, and 8. And so I'd say my wife's a martyr.
Your poor wife, that is rough.
The people who voted for me can thank my wife for making it all possible.
That is amazing. So. We got 2 and we stopped at 2. The second one about killed us as far as the transition. And I always thought I'd want a big family. I told my wife when we first got together in high school, I was like, we'll grow up, I want at least like 5 kids. And then we had the second one. I said, I think we're okay. Like, we're fine. So we love life, and I don't know if I can do it again. So that's awesome.
So you walk an interesting line with your representatives that you serve, and your citizens that you serve, being not only in Miami County based, but also Johnson County. What are the demographics in terms of, you have to cover a lot of people to help everyone?
That's right.
Is that something, are you hearing from all sides, all areas of the spectrum, not only Miami County and Johnson County, but at state level?
Yeah, so my Johnson County constituents are much louder than Miami County. No, but the issues are very different, right? So I represent, the easiest way to describe it is the northern tier of Miami County and southwestern Johnson County. So I have all of the city of Lewisburg, and then I have some of the areas of rural Paola and rural Spring Hill, but then I have all of Gardner, all of Edgerton, and southwestern Olathe. So it's a very, the makeup of the Senate district, it's not entirely suburban and it's not entirely rural, and the interests are very, very different. In Miami County, we try to protect ruralism. We try to protect our rural lifestyle. We care a lot about property rights and having managed growth to maintain that rural environment. You juxtapose that against what's happening in the southwestern part of Johnson County. It's some of the last land left, right, for continued development. And a lot of the industrial development has been happening in that Gardner and Edgerton corridor, and it represents some of the fastest growing areas of our state. Spring Hill and Gardner school districts, I believe, are the fastest growing school districts in the state. So the challenges are very different. The interests are very, very different. And even within Johnson County, there's areas that are in more established neighborhoods of Olathe, but then you also have those folks that are still rural folks out in the southwestern part of the county.
Now-
So very diverse.
On your district, has it updated over the years? Has it expanded? Because you look back 20 years ago, and Southern Olathe looks a lot like Lewisburg and a lot
That's
like
right, yeah.
Paola. So, do your predecessors, did they inherit that same district as you, or have you kind of expanded and had to change the role? Or even the previous people had to change the role since Southern Olathe really has changed so much in the last 20 years.
Yeah, so I'm the first senator to have the current map.
Okay.
So this was effective this last election cycle. I believe it was about 65% of the voters for Senate District 37 were new voters to the Senate District. To give you an idea of how radically the Senate districts have changed.
Wow.
So some of the reasons, the Senate districts kind of used to be numbered from east to west. So 37 used to be out west.
Okay.
And as population shifts have happened in Kansas, 37 was moved, I can't remember the exact year, was moved to the eastern part of the state, and at one time included up into Overland Park and south down here to Lewisburg. And something that happened with the last census and the last round of redistricting is Senate District, I'm going to mess this up, I think it was 35, so the Senate District that Senator T.J. Rose now represents had to get moved from the western part of the state, included around Hutchinson, had to get moved over to the eastern part of the state because, again, of the challenges with how the population of Kansas is shifting. And so now you have, instead of this Senate district going up into Stillwell and Overland Park, it stops at the county line and it shifts out over into Gardner. And there's a lot of restructuring, all tied to putting a shifting, I hate to say new Senate district, but shifting a Senate district from the western part of the state into Johnson County. So that created the need to redraw all the maps.
That's interesting. It's
Just
above my head,
okay.
but I'm glad that you run it and not me. So I'm just going to keep asking questions, and eventually I might understand this much of it.
Yeah. The biggest thing is that to remember is you essentially need to, for the senators, there's 40 of us. So you need to take the population of Kansas and divide it by 40, and they have to put geographic lines so that everybody represents about the same number of Kansans. So right now that number is about 77,000.
So if you were like in the middle of Kansas, your area is massive compared to maybe your 45-minute
That's
drive.
right. I have colleagues out further west that represent 11 counties, 14 counties, 9 counties. They represent much bigger geographic areas.
I'm thankful to be in Lewisburg, Kansas.
So when I'm complaining about having to drive 40 minutes to go knock doors in Olathe during campaign season, I had
I get it.
colleagues that were driving a couple hours to
That's-
knock doors.
Whatever you can do to get the vote, definitely. So, how are things going in the Kansas Senate right now? It's you're kind of wrapping up a busy time right now for the first part, if I'm not mistaken. Would you kind of talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so you're catching me in between first adjournment and going back for veto session. So in Kansas, legislative session is supposed to be 90 days. That's what the Constitution prescribes. Now, for about the last 20 years or so, it's been more like 100,
They
115.
put you on a stop.
It's been a little bit longer. So this year, they wanted to stick to that constitutional 90-day session, which in some ways is good because it constrains the amount of time you have to really screw things up. That's what I joke around about. But it also creates challenges because a lot of the legislators and the staff and the lobbyists and the advocacy groups, everybody's kind of used to having an extra few weeks to play with, and that was gone this year. So we started off a little bit behind the 8 ball. We also started off with a new budget process where the legislature didn't just wait for the governor to turn over a proposal and not have a role in it. The legislature was actually working on proposals as well for the budget. So there was some learnings that had to happen adjusting to this 90-day session and with the new budget process. So that was good. But for me personally, I'll say the session's gone very well. It's a really positive first year experience.
Good.
You learn some things that you thought were true that were not true, and some things that you thought were true that were definitely true. And it's been an absolute honor to be in there serving the constituents of Senate District 37. I went in, I was ready to work. I said, if I'm going to be away from my kids and I'm going to Topeka, I'm working. I'm not just going there to sit on my hands and not do much. So out of the gate, I got 15 bills introduced before the first new bill deadline. Actually, one of my bills for the Kansas Open Meetings Act, SB 70, was added into a House bill. 2134 is going to be enrolled into law. So as a freshman legislator,
Congrats.
I will have had some of my work that winds up in law. I've also done 4 amendments. One of the things I was really excited about, which most people are probably gonna be like, yeah, whatever. In Kansas, we instituted discounted lifetime hunting licenses for seniors and for kids. Well, for the kids, it was basically, it was 5 and under and 6 and 7. And it was a $300 license and a $400 license. And so in the Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee that heard that bill, I said, I don't see why we shouldn't have that discounted kids license go all the way to 15. And so that's what we've done. And I expect that the governor will go ahead and sign that bill, which I just think it's great. Getting kids engaged in the outdoors. So I didn't talk about, I'm an avid outdoorsman. Getting kids engaged at that younger age, giving people the opportunity to buy that lifetime license for them at a discount as a gift, whether that's a grandparent, an uncle, or just a mentor, whatever it is. You make that kid a Kansas resident for the purposes of hunting and fishing for the rest of their life. And hopefully, we can, even if they move out of the state, we can keep them engaged in the sport and contributing to the economy and conservation efforts. So that one I was pretty excited about. Anyway, long story short, I've been very happy with my experience first session.
Good. As somebody that's also has a lifetime hunting and fishing license, thank you. That's, I think, fantastic thing to have, because it's always nice being able to have that license ready. It reduces the obstacles for a lot of people.
That's right.
So, well, awesome. Thank you so much. So is there something more that we haven't covered a lot on here, Doug, that you want to highlight? Current bills, I know you're wrapping up your current session. Is there something you want to discuss?
Yeah, I would say there's a few big things. I mean, there's a number of bills we could talk about that have been, that have had headlines, and some things that actually haven't received headlines that I think are kind of headline worthy. We passed a bill that addressed some various aspects of our criminal code. One of the most important aspects of that bill number, which I'm forgetting the number off the top of my head, but we increased the penalties associated with soliciting and paying for sex to try to address the supply side of the human trafficking crisis that our state and our country faces. And that one didn't get a lot of headlines, but to me was something that felt very good to cast a yes vote for that, because that was really important. We've also, we passed constitutional amendments for Convention of States. We've passed bills to make sure that we can try to end Election Day at 7 p.m. on Election Day, which was really impactful. But one thing that they kind of pay attention to, even if they don't realize they're paying attention to it, is our state's spending and taxation. We passed a budget that was a cut relative to last year. Now, I anticipate next year we might come back and add a little bit to it. We'll see. But it's still, that budget was about $25.6 billion. And just for the state of Kansas. And our state spending, the trajectory has, over time has continued to increase. And there's a lot of challenges tied with that. Everything from our obligations to public education, to state assistance programs, to you name it, right? There's a lot of things that fit into that. But we did pass a budget that wasn't a perfect budget. There's a lot of people that, object to various aspects of it. But at the end of the day, directionally, I was pleased to see that Republicans were trying to be serious about, hey, we've got to stop the bleeding, right? Because it's twofold. We're a pretty high tax state, and our spending continues to increase, and where spending goes, taxation must follow, right? So that was a big one. The number one issue we heard at the door, and something I think, quite honestly, we got a little bit of egg on the face, was the debate on property taxes. And the property tax debate it's a complicated debate. We know that people have been struggling. We have more people in the United States now behind in their mortgages than ever before in the history of the United States, even on a percentage basis, not just the raw number, but on a percentage basis. And people in Kansas are having to leave their homes partly because of their tax burden, their property tax burden. That was a promise that Republicans and arguably Democrats made. Now I think our approaches are going to be different. We failed to get the House to support a constitutional amendment to put a cap on increases in appraised value on homes. The Senate passed that 4 times, and the House didn't want to take that up. But we also didn't have a bill. There was a bill circulated to try to address the property tax issue at the local level. That it started off as really a terrible bill, 2125, and it's been reworked. It got reworked in what's called conference committee, where the Senate and the House sit together to try to negotiate and broker a deal. It's possible that we come back and we vote on that in the veto session.
Okay.
But we'll see. If we don't, then essentially the biggest thing we'll have achieved on property taxes is eliminating the 1.5 mils that the state assesses for educational buildings, higher education buildings. But that's not eliminating the spending, that's eliminating the property tax. The spending is going to now come out of the state general fund.
It's gonna
So you rob Peter to
somewhere,
pay Paul a little
Yeah.
bit.
And I would say on the property tax thing, our property tax is just when we bought the house, it assessed it like, I want to say like 4,700, and our escrow account, we worked with an awesome title company. It was like, hey, this is going up. You need to pre-plan. And so I think when you talk about property tax, it just doesn't affect homeowners and businesses. It affects, it affects title companies and mortgage officers and realtors and all these things that help the economy run.
That's right.
And it really gets tight. And luckily we worked with an amazing title company right here in Lewisburg that was like, hey, if we don't pre-plan this, your escrow is going to be short and you are going to have to pay a ton extra. So let's just make sure we plan ahead. And so I am a huge advocate of lower property taxes, but I also see the need for some of it because the money has to come from somewhere. And as a service of a community member, you always want to think that your money's being spent on the right things. I don't think people are against giving the money away. I think they're against giving it away and not being used in a way that makes them feel good about themselves.
Yes, that's right.
A local rep who can explain how it's being used, I think will encourage that, maybe even if it can't be cut, it will be less belly aching because we know that our funds are being used properly.
Yeah. And one of the things in politics, and this is one of the challenging issues with property taxes, is the state has little to do with property taxes. It's really a local issue. And so part of the debate is when the state says, well, how do we try to fix this? Well, the cities and the counties and the schools and everybody says, hey, local control, leave us alone.
Yeah.
Like, we got to tax what we need to, right? And that's one of the challenging aspects of it is to navigate what's the appropriate amount of local control and where do we as the legislature need to kind of look out for our citizens and ensure that they're not overburdened. But it also speaks to the important, everybody pays attention to what's happening in Washington, D.C., when in reality, the offices that have the most direct impact on your life on a daily basis are your school board, your city council, and your county commission. And if you're not paying attention to those races and you're not involved and you're not trying to get good candidates and you're not paying attention to what they're doing, then that's how a lot of messes are created. That's where a lot of the spending and whatnot comes from. We're fortunate in Miami County that we don't have some of the same struggles that some of the other communities had when it comes to local electeds. And ours are generally pretty accessible, but it warrants paying attention. And seeing what's going on.
Well, and that kind of leads me to my next question, and I kind of addressed it at the beginning of, somebody who is not from the area, moved to Kansas, opened a business, is trying to get involved. Where would you start at trying to make the biggest impact, or at least educating yourself to know which route you want to take?
So there's a lot of different ways to be civically engaged. So there's everything from, there's a number of boards. I'll just use Lewisburg as an example, that there's vacancies and openings that happen all the time. So that can be, serving on the board for the rec commission or the library board. There's the elected offices that you can, if you want to, you can seek to run for those political offices. But everybody in government, everybody that has an elected role in government also needs kind of a circle of mentors and a circle of friends to be able to bounce things off of and communicate with. And you can be that person for a local elected, right? When I drive back and forth to Topeka during the legislative session, I'm surrounded by the people that are in the Capitol building.
Yeah.
Right? And so, being able to reach out to my folks that are back at home is really, really important. And, we're at this interesting time in the United States when it comes to advocacy and being involved and caring about issues. we've had some waves where people get really, really loud about a particular issue and then they kind of dwindle off. So like COVID was a great example. A lot of the radical trans agenda happening in schools, people get really loud about that and then they kind of peter off, and they're not paying attention to everything else that's operationally happening with
The day-to-day.
the day-to-day, right? It's important to stay engaged and knowledgeable about what's happening in the day-to-day, because then you understand how you got to that point that people started screaming, right?
It's not just one
And
issue.
it's also important to understand is that there are times to be firm and be strong, potentially to be a little loud, but by and large, for the most part, that's not the most effective way to get what you want, right? You do it through negotiation. You do it through sometimes you got to do the carrot and the stick game, right? And determining, sitting there screaming is not a carrot or a stick. You're just sitting there screaming, and it's pretty easy to shut you out the door, right? So being intentional and strategic and consistently engaged, respectful, and giving to your community, being engaged, if it's PTO or if it's on your church board or Rotary, whatever that looks like, but being engaged is an intentional effort, and you have to take the time.
Intention, and
That's
it takes
right.
time, and it sounds like it's like, man, I got to go here and I got to go there, but I got my kids, and it's like, most of the time those are excuses. You take 30 minutes and you set it aside, and as long as most of these things are not sprung on you, they're pre-planned,
That's right.
and just put it on a calendar and go, and that's been my bit, and that's just internally what I tell myself, not what I'm telling anybody else.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, just keep telling yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, time is finite, but all of this stuff matters.
Yeah.
Right. And we have a habit, and I'll speak as conservative, right? Conservatives for so long in America, it was like, I want to have my job or my business and take care of my family, and you just leave me the heck alone, please. Right? That was the wrong position to take. We needed to be engaged in the process. We needed to be paying attention. We needed to make sure that our voices and our opinions were heard. Because when you don't do that, you end up with something that doesn't represent you anymore, right? And that's a really important piece of it. And even in a community like Lewisburg, if you're not engaged in paying attention to what's happening in the city council, and this would be true in Paola or Osawatomie or what have you, and you're not trying to have a seat at that table, then no offense, but what can you complain about? You weren't there at the table, and so if you care about the sidewalks going in, or you would like to see more investment out at Lewis and Young Park, or you think that the county should do something on some of the whatever, right?
Yeah.
Don't just be the complainer. Be somebody that's actually there trying to come up with solutions, and be working hand in hand with our government entities, and then you can really make a difference.
Okay.
You can also bring advocacy through doing podcasts and Facebook.
Yeah, exactly.
All that stuff.
Yeah,
It's
no,
different
and
path.
this was just kind of a huge transition, and we do appreciate your time. This is a huge transition for us, but the more awareness we can bring to small business owners, those are what makes up Lewisburg, Miami County, Southern Johnson County. It doesn't matter where you go. Small business owners have a huge play in the influence and the impact of the community, and so if we can bring awareness to them and they do better, the community is going to do better as a whole, and that's kind of our goal here.
Yeah, and I'd say on the state level, our state is great at giveaways for really, really big companies.
Yeah.
Probably too much so. But what we're not good at is facilitating a pro-business environment for small businessmen. And I've actually spoken with the Secretary of Commerce / Lieutenant Governor about this, and some other folks saying Kansas needs to reassess its priorities and reassess how do we facilitate a pro-business environment for folks like yourselves that are trying to start a business and work hard for your family and for your community, and how do we create a pro-business environment that isn't just focused at multi-billion-dollar corporations or folks that already have the means to do essentially whatever they want. How do we help lift people up and get them going on their business journey? The amount of economic consolidation in the United States over the last 10 to 20 years has been remarkable. Like, we look at all these private equity groups and everything else that's been gobbling up,
Especially
all these
private
businesses.
real estate.
Yeah.
It's huge. A ton of corporations throughout even Johnson County. A lot of those residential properties are owned by a corporation. They're not owned by a landlord who you can talk to. And on the insurance side of things, it makes it a struggle because when you get to a big property management who owns 15 different properties instead of an individual, they're force placing a lot of policies instead of going back to the local insurance, and it affects all manners of business. So I 100% agree that we should be focused on small businesses and not corporations, but that's just my 2 cents.
They have their place, but
Yes.
as a good family friend once taught me when I was a kid, he was a big Ron Paul guy, but he goes, Doug, regulations are meant to put somebody else out of business and make someone else money.
Exactly.
Now that's not always true, but as a general rule of thumb, we have to be careful and measured and make sure that we're not creating an anti-competitive environment that makes it where others can't thrive and succeed. So
100%.
Well, perfect. Well, Doug, hey, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been wonderful hearing about things going on in Topeka. If nobody's got anything else, let's close up, shall we?
all right, thank
All
you.
right, thanks,
so much for
guys,
joining us.
and keep on growing.